Hi, hello, what is up, and welcome back to Girl You Haven't Heard, the podcast where we discuss true crime and Black Canadian history from a critical decolonial perspective, but above all else, without all the unnecessary propaganda that others love to include but we hate to listen to. Today we're going to be talking about the disappearing or the kidnapping of 5-year-old Tatianna Cuevas. So Tatiana's parents are Kristen Allen and John Cuevas, who both lived and worked in Brampton, Ontario, Canada when they met, and Kristen still lives there up until this day. The pair hit it off right off the bat. They got along extremely well, and John was extremely charming and charismatic. However, when they first met, John introduced himself as Carlos, said that he was 26 years old, and claimed to be a sporting store manager. The beginning of their relationship was happy, or at least appeared to be. Kristen says that it was very tumultuous under the surface. John was verbally and emotionally abusive throughout the entirety of their relationship. Kristen recalls that it was always John's way or no way at all. Whenever she would fight back, she would be met with more control and further manipulation and abuse. Kristen got pregnant and the pair were extremely thrilled, but then the multitude of lies that John told her began to come to the surface. First of which was that his name was not Carlos, it was in fact John. He was not 26, but he was actually 32, and he was not a sports store manager, he was an optometrist. He also lied about a lot more and much more serious things, according to Kristen. He lied about things which Kristen determined to be things of significance. All of these things are quite odd to lie about, especially when you first meet someone. Like, I'm not saying that there's ever a reason to lie, but it's extremely weird to meet someone and just lie to them immediately off the bat about the very basic things like your name, your age, and what you do for work. These things immediately set off red flags in Kristen's mind, but she was a victim of abuse and she was pregnant, so she understandably made the decision to stay with John. Their daughter, Tatianna Cuevas, was born on August 18th of 2012. She was described as an old soul, wise beyond her years, and just bursting with love for everyone, everything, and life itself. Just absolutely the sweetest girl out there. When Tatiana was just a few months away from turning 1, Kristen had had enough of John's abuse and decided to end the relationship in her and her daughter's best interest. It's unclear how long the two were in a relationship, but it seems to be somewhere between 1 and 2 years. The pair did not have a formal custody agreement put in place at this time, but Tatiana remained with Kristen full-time and John was able to come and visit with her or take her for visits literally whenever he wanted. Kristen was not at all trying to restrict his access to Tatiana. He had consistent and regular visits. She never tried to withhold their daughter in any capacity. Before Tatiana's first birthday, Kristen was in a terrible car accident, and so she had to regularly go to physical therapy, and this was draining mentally, physically, and emotionally. So she made the decision to put Tatiana into daycare, which, understandable, a very normal thing to do. This is ultimately when John began to say that he figured it would be better for Tatiana to be cared for by him rather than putting her in daycare. He would then try and manipulate Kristen into doing what he wanted by saying things like, how will you go back to school? Or how will you work? Like, how are you going to do all these things? Implying that she was somehow less capable or an inadequate parent due to her accident, which was completely out of her control. Kristen immediately felt guilty for putting their daughter in daycare and promptly removed her because, again, John was very abusive, very manipulative. So that doesn't just go away once you are no longer in a relationship with someone. That hold kind of remains for a while. Despite John having regular access whenever he wished, he didn't believe that his access to Tatiana was enough. He began to suggest that he be given more time, and those suggestions quickly turned into blackmail when he didn't get his way. He then began to refuse to return Tatiana from her visits with him. This happened on at least 3 different occasions, one instance being 3 weeks long, where he had Tatiana in his custody, didn't want to share with Kristen where they were or when she would be back home. He went on to tell her that he would not return Tatiana unless Kristen signed over full custody. So again, more manipulation, more abusive behavior. Eventually, Child and Family Services became involved, an emergency order was filed, and that is what allowed Tatiana to be returned home to Kristen. On Tatiana's first birthday, while Kristen was celebrating with her family, John served her with custody papers, letting her know that he was taking her to court, trying to get full custody. The pair spent about 5 years in court trying to determine custody, and Tatiana continued to stay with her mom, Kristen, full-time and go back and forth on regular visits to her dad, John. Throughout the custody battle, as it was a long time, both John and Kristen got into new relationships and would eventually go on to get married. Kristen was extremely happy in her new relationship. Her husband lovingly accepted Tatiana, and they would go on to have a son together whom Tatiana adored. She was absolutely the best big sister. He adored and still adores her just as much as she adored him. John also got remarried, and oddly enough, he made Tatiana call his wife Mom in Hungarian. Eventually, custody was decided, and Kristen was granted full custody with primary care and control. But there was a suspicious clause in their agreement that was put in there at John's request. This clause stated that John was allowed to take Tatiana on international vacations, and Kristen had to sign a letter of permission allowing her to leave, as she was the parent who had full custody. He was allowed to take her whenever he wanted, wherever he wanted, and for however long he wanted, as long as he provided Kristen with an itinerary and advance notice. This was, of course, extremely concerning considering his past history of taking Tatiana and not wanting to return her home when they were in the same city. Now, imagine what it would be like when they were out of the country. What if he did the same thing? Kristen was just happy to be out of court, finally having all of this settled, so they both signed their custody agreement and moved on. Shortly after the custody agreement was put into place, John requested to take Tatiana on an international vacation.
You don't find that suspicious?
And Kristen was quite hesitant. She had a very strange gut feeling, a motherly instinct, if you could call it, that he would take her and he would not bring her back. Because of this, she consulted her lawyer, and he told her that she had to sign the agreement and let Tatiana go. If she didn't, then they would have to go back to court on the grounds of John being denied his legal rights after all this time of just finally coming to an agreement. John's travel itinerary stated that he and Tatiana were going to go on a 2-week vacation to travel to Germany and France. The pair were to leave on July 29th, 2018 and return on August 12th of 2018. Kristen reluctantly agreed and signed a letter of consent allowing Tatiana to leave the country with John. John also provided Kristen with a WhatsApp phone number in order for them to communicate throughout the trip. Kristen had noticed some inconsistencies in the itinerary, and she pointed them out to the necessary channels, and nothing was done. She tried to confront John about it, and he just kind of brushed off her concerns. The courts literally had her hands tied, and she was unable to do anything despite her gut instincts telling her that something was off. And John's previous history showing that this would not go as planned, at least on her part. Prior to leaving for this vacation, John was making an extra effort to distance himself from his extended family, which they thought was odd, but not anything out of the ordinary, not anything extremely alarming, not anything that would raise red flags for them. Would have raised a lot of red flags for me personally, but that's just me. A few days before Tatiana left for vacation with her father, she wrote a message on her mom's door using a bright pink marker. The message read, "I love you and you are the best mom." Tatiana was 5 years old at the time. She wrote messages and drew pictures for her mom and her family literally all of the time. So this was not anything out of the ordinary. But to this day, she still has not gotten rid of the message, and she is unsure if or when she will be able to.
I loved her, and I would see her in 2 weeks.
This would be one of the last times Kristen was able to communicate with her daughter, the deep love shared between the two of them. On the day of their departure, Kristen had a missed call from John on the WhatsApp number, but when she attempted to return the call, there was no answer. This is the last contact attempt that John or Tatiana would make. Tatiana and John left July 29th, 2018 as planned. Now, between July 29th and August 4th, the two of them were spotted in Paris, France, Budapest, Hungary, Dubai, and Nigeria. I tried to find exactly where in Dubai and Nigeria, but that information wasn't readily available. On August 4th of 2018, Tatiana and John were spotted in an airport in Togo, West Africa.
They found that they went through the Togo airports and they had video surveillance taken as they had exited the airport. But from then, there's been nothing.
This is the last confirmed time that either of them have been seen. As I mentioned before,
Supposed to return August 12th, and they didn't get off the flight.
Kristen messaged John on the day of their return and got no response. Kristen didn't want to assume the worst when she didn't hear back from him. She tried to give John the benefit of the doubt and just soothe herself that it was her own paranoia that John would not do this. They were flying internationally, so delays were very possible and very likely. He didn't have a phone number. He was just communicating through WhatsApp, and that needs Wi-Fi, so maybe there was issues with that. Maybe there had been a scheduling conflict or a misunderstanding. So she continued to try to contact him, just try to figure out what was going on, where they were, and heard nothing. On August 14th, 2018, Kristen reported her daughter as missing to the Peel police. It had been 2 days after they were supposed to arrive. They had not shown up and nobody had heard from them. Immediately, charges were laid against John on the grounds of parental abduction. There is currently a Canada-wide warrant for his arrest, so the minute he steps back into Canada, he's supposed to be arrested. And Tatiana was also registered as an international missing child who had been parentally abducted by her father. There is currently an international Interpol alert for both Tatiana and John. An Interpol notice or an Interpol alert is an international alert that is circulated by Interpol, the organization, to communicate information about crimes, criminals, and threats to member states or their counterparts around the world. So it's basically just a way to get messages out there to all police in a variety of countries, basically internationally. So there are different levels of Interpol alerts. Tatiana's is a yellow level and is readily available to the public. John's, however, is a red level, and so it is only available to police agencies as they say that he is not a threat. We're going to get into the varying levels that the police failed, but this is just one of them, and the way that policing continues to fail, because his information should also be readily available to the public. But Tatiana is currently listed on domestic and international websites for missing children. Media attention on this case has been slow, inconsistent, and essentially non-existent. Kristen has had to fight for every ounce of coverage this case has gotten, and that's extremely unfair to her and her daughter.
If there's some possibility at all that she's watching, what would you want to say to her?
I've not forgotten about you, and I absolutely love you, and I miss you, and we have not been the same since you've gone.
Had this case been with a girl of a different ethnicity, or she had been taken by a parent who was Black, for example, I feel like this case would have been handled extremely differently just due to racism and varying biases that people continue to hold locally and internationally as well. It's important to note that John has many aliases. He has many different names that he could be going by at this time, such as John Varga, Dr. John Varga, Carlos Cueva, Carlos Cuevas, John Varga Cuevas, or John Cuevas. It is very possible that he's going by another name at this point, but that name would be kind of unknown. It's also important to note that John calls Tatiana Bijou or Bibi, and he may be introducing her as such if they are still together at this point, or he may have a completely new name for her altogether. Age-progress images of what Tatiana might look like now have been put out, and I've linked them down below as well, so you can download them, you can save them, you can share them yourself. To give a better idea, again, of what she'll look like now, just because she was 5 years old at the time of her disappearance, and a lot can change in that time frame. There are very few leads, despite Tatiana being gone for over 4 years at this point, despite international police organizations being made aware of her disappearance. No one has spotted Tatiana or her father, or if they have been spotted, it has not been reported, or it has not been shared with Kristen, as there doesn't seem to be a very good level of communication between the international police and the Peel police, which is a problem.
International aspect is definitely what makes it the most challenging, having to deal with different police agencies.
There has allegedly been no contact between either of the families and the pair. I personally find it extremely hard to believe that there hasn't been contact between John and his family, but also, like, where is his wife in all of this? Tatiana's little brother, who was 1.5 at the time of her disappearance, continues to insist the family set a place for his sister at the table in hopes that she will come home soon to fill that place. Charges have been laid against John, but Kristen wants it to be known that it is not of the utmost importance to her whatsoever. She just wants her daughter returned safely home to her. The situation has nothing to do with the conflict or history between her and John, but this is just all about making sure that Tatiana is safe, alive, and well at this point, as she has not been seen or heard from in over 4 years. So now I'm just going to mention a few of the things that you can do to help Kristen in her fight to find her daughter, make sure she's safe, and bring her home. You can share this video as a way to get all of the information out there. You can share the posters, and you can also share their descriptions. You can join the group to support the search for Tatiana. I will have that link down below. You can also donate to Kristen's GoFundMe to help her and her family pay for a private investigator to help locate Tatiana. It is believed that a private investigator would have been extremely useful, especially with all of the added barriers which have been created due to the pandemic. PIs are expensive, and so they need support to be able to follow through with this next crucial step in not only locating Tatiana, but bringing her home. Again, all of those links can be found in the description below. Kristen and her loved ones deserve to get Tatiana home, and you can support that using the hashtag #HelpFindTatiana. Tatiana was 5 years old at the time of her disappearance. She would now have brown shoulder-length curly hair and brown eyes. She's a visibly Black girl and described as having a thin build, and it's estimated she would now be around 80 pounds or about 4 feet tall. John may be going by the aliases that I mentioned before, but primarily Juan or Carlos. He is approximately 5'8" in his mid-40s. He has a light skin tone. He may possibly have a chin strap, goatee, or other types of facial hair, and he has typically short brown hair and brown eyes, but his hair may be different at this point in time. If you spot Tatiana or John, you can report the sighting anonymously at crimestoppers.ca, but I would recommend going directly to Kristen and contacting her via the Facebook page or making a post in the Facebook group, as her friends are mods, so someone will see the message and get to you. There's also a $5,000 reward to go towards anyone who can provide information which leads to locating Tatiana and bringing her home. Now we have come to the part in the video where I just give my thoughts. Personally, I feel very frustrated by this case. I literally, at the time that this happened, I lived in Manitoba, which is the province right beside Ontario, and I had never heard about this. I don't think that there was enough attention towards it then. I don't think there's enough attention towards it now. I think it's ridiculous that Kristen has had to fight to get all of the attention that the case has and the coverage that the case has. I think that this case just goes to show how police and policing, the concept, is an absolute joke. It's an absolute joke, because if things were more community oriented and community focused and community based, because that's what it's having to go to anyways in order to get any information, if there were stronger senses of community in the places that they were seen, the places that they may now be located in, then it's likely that she would have already been found or brought home. This case would have been much better off if police just weren't involved at all, because they haven't been helpful. The support that Kristen's gotten, locally or internationally, has been community-based. She's been able to go and build a community who's actively keeping their eyes out, who is doing whatever they can to raise awareness. So I think that this just goes to show police and policing are completely useless at this point. I also think that a large part of why people don't really care about this case, and I'm just going to be 100% honest, it has to do with the fact that it's a little black girl who went missing with her non-black father. I think that if she had gone missing with her black father, or if it had been a white girl who had gone missing with a darker skinned parent, I think the dynamic would be completely different. There would be more sense of an urgency to locate her. I also think that people believe just because she's with her father, it's not that big of a deal. But John has a history of being abusive, so it is a big deal. I also personally find it very hard to believe that nobody has had contact with John this entire time and that nobody has seen them. But again, this is one of the problems with relying on police and policing. Right? There have not been any updated pictures of Tatiana put out there till recently, and Interpol did not want to put John's face out there. They just wanted to put Tatiana's. So even if people had seen them, they probably wouldn't know that it was them. I also, this is just me personally, I don't like how the police just automatically assumed, yeah, it's a parental abduction and then that's it. Nobody has seen them, heard from them, or spotted them in the last 4 years, 4+ years at this point. So why is it just automatically assumed that he took her somewhere and then that's it? There should be more of a sense of urgency to locate what happened to them, because they are in a place that is so far away from Tatiana's home. It's likely that something more sinister could have gone on to Tatiana or to John. It's not just like, oh, they're hiding away and they've started a new life. That can't just be the automatic assumption. More should be done to locate them on behalf of the police and of the government. I do think that Kristen needs all the support and the love that she can get, so it would mean a lot to, I'm sure, her and to me as well if you would go and make sure to join that Facebook group, make sure to leave an encouraging message or message her privately an encouraging message. Let her know that you are doing what you can to get the message out there. She will eventually be located, and Kristen and her family and her loved ones will have the closure that they deserve when it comes to finding Tatiana, knowing where she's at, knowing that she's okay, and bringing her home. So again, you can find all of those links down below. Make sure to share them. Make sure to use the hashtag HelpFindTatiana. I thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode.